afternoon. How are we doing? Are we awake? Yeah? Yeah. Well, I'm so honored to be here with you today to share my story with you, which I believe will help address the question that's pressing our culture right now. Are children truly unwanted? And I want to begin our time together first by telling you a little bit about my birth mother, a woman I've developed over time a deep compassion for. In fact, it's a compassion that has grown and reached new heights since I became a mother in 2017. Her name was Lydia. She traveled to America as a teenager from Honduras and started having children of her own at a very young age. She was a victim of racism, poverty, and domestic violence, injustices we sometimes are tempted to believe don't have room in the pro-life conversation. I know for certain she didn't have the support to raise her children with the various male partners in her life, because they were men who struggled with addiction, men who were violent, and men who cared little for her or for her children. To make her situation worse, she battled with schizophrenia in adulthood, a type of psychosis that makes functioning nearly impossible. In 1989, she found out that she was pregnant for the 7th time. The pregnancy was the result of an affair, and she was already a mother to 6 children, including twins living in her home. Her children fought day to day over canned goods, damaged belongings. They lived on government assistance, and I mean handouts. I mean thrift store clothes, and for the older ones, the meals they received in school. Some of her children had already experienced the Louisiana foster care system. You see, in my view now, my mother tried her very best to care for her children through her work as a part-time maid. In fact, I found out a story. She passed away in 2010, October of 2010. And I found out a story at that time that she had gone to, and I'm telling you this illustration so you can try to get in her shoes for a minute. She had gone to Walgreens to pick up her prescription because she had pneumonia, which contributed to her premature death. And because she was 5 cents short on her medication, the pharmacist refused to give her her medication. She didn't have good access to mental health care, the ability to follow through on taking her medication, and even had been homeless through periods of her life. So it would be safe to say that another pregnancy was not good news for her, but that pregnancy was with me. So she shared her situation with a friend, and her friend told her about a physician who was an abortionist in New Orleans who provided care to women who were poor. He was an abortionist who helped mostly poor minority women like she was, Hispanic women. So she went to his clinic, and he delivered me breech at 26 weeks. I wasn't breathing when I was born, and he refused to give me medical care. The scenario I'm describing to you might sound a little bit familiar because of what's happening right now in our country. The debate over late-term abortion and infanticide that's been extensive this year. The governor of Virginia recently said that if a baby was born alive during a late-term abortion and needed medical attention, a conversation would occur between the woman and her physician on whether or not to resuscitate the child. His comment came after a representative in a state introduced a measure similar to the measure we saw in New York that would significantly loosen restrictions on late-term abortion. The governor said, this is what would happen in 3rd trimester abortions. They're done in cases where there may be severe deformities. So in this particular example, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated, if that was what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physician and the mother. Okay, but in my case, the abortionist wasn't interested in a discussion. Instead, he told my mother what should happen to me. He said to her, you should let her die on the table. She's going to be a mental vegetable, incapable of having a normal life. Ultimately, in that moment, he decided that I didn't meet the criteria he established for personhood. But in that quick, life-altering moment for me, my mother made an amazing pro-life choice and fought for my life. She threatened to sue him if he continued to refuse to get me medical assistance, and I was sent to Children's Hospital in New Orleans, where I did receive help and lived because of my mother's persistence. Don't worry, I'm gonna get to the foster care and adoption stuff real soon here. Yeah. I later learned that the same abortionist who delivered me was under review by the Louisiana Board of Medical Examiners performing botched abortions around that time, leaving fetal body parts in a woman, causing her to hemorrhage, causing extensive damage to her. But I would really like to go on from here and tell you that everything was great after such a difficult entry into the world, that I never felt unwanted, back to that question, that I was the exception in my family and that things took a turn for the better. But that simply wasn't true. That same year of my birth, my mother gave birth to another set of twins, and a year later, another child, giving her a total of 11 children. As one of the youngest of my mother's children, I experienced firsthand the ramifications of poverty, that is malnutrition and sickness, eventually even contracting tuberculosis, a life-threatening lung disease from my stepfather. I lived in a war-torn environment with my older siblings turning against the younger ones in an attempt to survive, to have their basic needs met. And we all fought for my mother's attention, a futile goal to get to because she was so sick. I also was schooled early about the predatory relationship men can have with women and children and the ramifications of racism and the way the cycle of poverty can entrap a family. I was, however, handed what I discovered is somewhat of a rarity in the imperfect foster care system. I was placed into a home of a couple that truly cared about my well-being and safety. They weren't interested in the money that could be provided through foster care or focused on what they could gain personally from taking in a foster care kid. My foster parents were middle-aged, without any children of their own, and they knew about my family's medical background, the mental illness that ran in my family rampantly. They weren't wealthy. They didn't have advanced education on childhood trauma. They were regular people, a school teacher, an ESL kindergarten teacher, and a businessman. Social workers introduced me to them cautiously, warning them that I could have the same difficulties my family did. And importantly, that they would only have me for 6 to 8 months. They knew going in that they could get a phone call at any moment and I could go back to my birth family. You see, the goal of foster care is to reunify the child with the birth family. And children are often shifted between their biological family and the foster care family until the state makes a decision about the birth parents. But despite these risks, the couple that took me in did an outrageous thing, opening up their life to me and taking me in as their own. They decided that they would leave the future where it belonged, in the future. Unfortunately, though, they did receive that phone call that I would have to go back home. And those were some dark days for me. Even though I loved my birth family, even though I wanted to be with my siblings, my sisters, my brothers, it didn't mean I wasn't starving. It didn't mean I wasn't abused. All those things happened in the context of what should be a healthy, thriving, loving family. Thankfully, I did end up going back into foster care with the same couple that took me in at 16 months. And after 8 years in the system, I was adopted at the age of 9. I escaped the prison that was my childhood home right before reaching the adolescent period of my life, which is a critical time in a person's development. What I really want you to take home here, though, today is that I was rescued because someone wanted me, because someone took action. I know exactly now the future I would have had if that wasn't the case, because I had to watch it unfold in the lives of my siblings. One of my sisters got married at age 15 to a drug dealer. And she had never been adopted. She had been in and out of foster care families. And then she overdosed and died at the age of 19, leaving a daughter behind. Others have struggled with substance abuse and mental illness. See, the reality is for foster kids, their outcomes are often poor, with some leaving the system with PTSD, an increased risk of drug addiction, and unpleasant realities about their ability to attach with healthy other adults. And they often partake in high-risk behavior like illicit sex, criminal activity, experience chronic healthcare problems, and suffer from psychiatric disorders. In addition to this, compared to the general population, former foster care children are less likely to go to college and often rely on government services for food and healthcare. But you see, the reason my story is an exception to this is not because foster care is perfect or because the system works successfully in my case. In fact, I would say the opposite's true. The state took only 2 years shy of a decade to make determinations about my family and terminate my mother's parental rights, even after having sufficient evidence of parental abuse and neglect. But my story is an exception because of the quality of people that took me in. So when someone asks me, are there really unwanted children or do women really need abortion? to protect them from ongoing suffering, I say there certainly shouldn't be any unwanted children, and we should be a culture that rejects abortion as a solution to human suffering and unwantedness. Our communities should be finding real answers to the problem of childhood abuse, poverty, and neglect by working to improve the foster care system and advance adoption. We should be working together to ensure that women, rather than relying on abortion when they are in crisis, rely on families like the one I met and the one I lived with and grew up with. In a right world even, Planned Parenthood wouldn't be an abortion hub. They would be a center where pregnant women could go and find out about adoption, and where communities could get together and collaborate about ways to improve foster care. Of course, that's not where we live. As my pro-life convictions have taken shape over time and matured, I found that being pro-life is comprehensive. And it does require this one thing. It requires that we dig a little deeper into the messy waters of why women actually do have abortions and why children are said to be unwanted. Behind that question, you don't find a black and white answer, but you do find women like my mother was and children like I was. The truth is, there isn't a perfect foster care system. There isn't a perfect parent or a quick and easy way to clean up a child's life after they've experienced what I have. But I have found that my life's proof that there can be real solutions, that we always immediately reject abortion every single time it's offered to a woman in crisis. And instead, we look at foster care and we look at adoption in ways to advance those things, life-giving options. It takes courage, though. It takes bravery. It takes commitment. And it sounds very noble, but what it looked like for me is a couple that owned a 3-bedroom home that picked me up before I was even in care, or before I had returned to care, and brought me to kindergarten, and brought me clothes, and brought all my siblings hygiene bags. They took action because they saw me suffering. That's what it's really going to take to turn this thing around. I hope I've inspired you. I hope I've been able to share with you a different perspective about the abortion issue. But I know we have some other people here today that are going to talk to us more about foster care and adoption. So I'm going to let them begin and share what their stories are too.
Hello, we're Ryan and Jocelyn Maynard. We got married in 1999, full of the dreams of family and hope for children, and it didn't happen the way we planned. We found out pretty early on that our hopes of achieving pregnancy were probably not very realistic, and took us 7 years to cycle through the fertility stuff and be at the place where we were really ready to choose adoption and be excited about it. And our first son, we found out about a need for adoptive parents at Catholic Charities in October, and he was in our arms December 14th. It's unusual, not the norm, but it was a private adoption, and we were delighted, filled with every kind of joy. He was totally wanted. And when he was about 2.5 years old, our desire to give him a sibling and have more children kind of exploded. And we started taking classes through the Department of Human Services to foster and adopt. And we were going through those classes when Ryan's mom called me and she said, "Jocelyn, I found you a baby." I was like, "Oh, you did?" And that night we met our second son, who was in foster care with his biological grandparents. And it took some time. These processes take time, and they're not always pleasant, but neither is labor and delivery, right? And he came home, and he was home for a while, and we began the process to adopt through. And so we had 2 little boys, and we're looking, when you adopt, being vetted, and then they give you a password to a website, and the children are on there, which is bizarre. It's a hard thing to look at children on a website, but we saw these two little boys, more boys, and we just fell in love with them. And so we asked for our home study to be submitted to their caseworker. And we were chosen for them. And they came home, and they were home for 5 days. They were biological brothers, two little boys, 2-year-old and 1-year-old at the time. And they were home for 5 days, and we got a call from their caseworker saying their mom just had another baby boy. Like, yes! We always wanted a big family, and at the point in time where we realized our family would grow through adoption, we just didn't think that was a very reasonable hope to entertain. And so at 4 months old, our little Micah came home, and he was home for, 5 months when we found out birth mom is pregnant again. And 11 months after he came home, our first and only daughter was born, and our little Miriam. And we are thrilled. It has had its ups and downs, certainly challenges and difficulties. I won't lie about that. And if you want to know, that sort of information, I can certainly share it with you. But we're here today to say it's worth it. It's worth it. All we ever wanted was to raise a family. And even though the children came maybe on a quicker timeline than we would have planned, it's been beautiful. It's been beautiful, and they are treasures. And neither of us can imagine our life without any of them, even on the hardest of days. So we're just here to say difficulty does not define beautiful.
I should probably just pass the mic because that was so well done. And I'm sitting up here and I'm thinking, I'm feeling like, do you know when the angel Gabriel came to Mary at the Annunciation? I feel like Mary right now. I feel like, blessed are you among women up here, because just some fantastic folks here. And I'm looking at these letters backwards, and I'm thinking, together we advocate. It's interesting. I am not up here. There's no eyes here. So we do this together. I'm also thinking how strange it is to be sitting up here in this stage with these bright lights in our eyes and kind of squinting out at everybody and thinking, why are we here? We're not here because we have some kind of superpower. We're not here because, in fact, we have something that all of you don't possess also. We're here because we prayed, which is dangerous. It's a dangerous thing to ask God for anything. At the wedding feast of Cana, when the wine ran out, and it's like, there's no more wine. And so Mary says, Jesus, can you take care of this? And he's like, okay, Mom. And he doesn't just make some wine, he makes 130 gallons of wine. When we ask the Lord for something, he doesn't bless us small, he blesses us big. And that's what we found in our life, in our experience with this. We asked the Lord, we were open, but he asked us also. He asked us to say yes. That's the only thing he asks of any of us, is to just say yes. Are there unwanted children? I don't know. We've never met one.
And when we do,
Yeah.
we're bringing them home.
Yeah. Funny story is at church this week at a service midweek, and there was a lot of people there, and the youth minister was talking to a young man for quite a while. And I saw the conversation. I work at the church there too, and I talked to her afterwards, and I said, you know, what was going on? It looked like you really had an important and serious conversation with that young man, and he was in high school. And she said, yeah, he was sharing that he thinks his girlfriend is pregnant and doesn't know what to do, and was asking me about abortion and if that's okay. This is at church. And I said, tell the kid we'll take him. And she said, I already did. I tell you that because being pro-life means being consistent. It means being open about it. That, you know, to be pro-life in the closet is to be less pro-life than we're called to be. People need to know. People need to know that together we advocate for life, because it gives others the courage and the strength to choose life themselves. And so by your witness, you know, we all up here have a different kind of witness to our families and our churches and our culture and the world. And you have a witness too. And you have a witness for life. And it's finding that witness where you're no longer just an I, but you're part of this we together. So we can't do this. We can't stop the evil out there alone. We need to be together. We need to pray. And we need to say yes when God asks of us something. Because sometimes when you say yes to a baby, it ends up being 4 babies. And that's kind of awesome. And I think, you know, she was describing the process, and was it difficult? Was it, you know, were there challenges to foster care? Yes. If you go that route, will there be difficulties that you couldn't even have dreamt of? Yes, there will be. Will your family and your marriage endure stress? Yeah, it will. It will. But I've never encountered something that was good. It was worth doing. It was also easy. I've never encountered something great to be done that was easy. And standing up for life in the way that you're called to stand up for life, that's great. And it won't be easy.
I just have to stand. I use my hands, and I'll feel better if I'm walking around so I can see you all. I'm Brooke Gray. I am the executive director of Every Child Oregon, and it's an organization that works intentionally with the foster care system here in Oregon. Started right here in Portland, and I'll share a little bit about that in just a moment. First of all, you all have these really great index cards on your chair, and you may be wondering, what are these for? I have an answer for you. I'm just going to share for a few minutes, and then we're going to be available to answer any questions you might have. So if there's a question that strikes you from Sarah's story, from the Maynard story, please don't hesitate to write it down, and some folks will collect those here in just a moment. My husband and I signed up to be foster parents, having no biological children of our own either, and no idea what it would entail. We didn't understand normal child development, let alone children with trauma. So why not dive into the deep end? So after 4 years of consideration around what it would mean to step into these waters and some lifestyle arrangements so that we could make it happen, i.e. getting a home that had more than one bedroom, we decided to become foster parents. And on a cold December morning, we got our very first phone call at 4 a.m. on a Monday. 2 kids had been found wandering the streets of downtown Portland alone. They were 5 and 3. Could we take them just until our Department of Human Services office opened? And of course we said yes. We jumped out of bed, we turned on the Christmas tree and the heat, because we're those people. We got the toys out that our friends had donated to us, and we waited all of 15 minutes before a police officer rang the doorbell and dropped off 2 kids, along with their McDonald's pancake breakfast that he had driven them through to get. And in walks 5-year-old Sophie, whose name I have changed, and she says, "Hi, I'm Sophie." And I didn't know what I expected, but it was everything but that. And she walked in and her eyes lit up as she saw the Christmas tree and the toys that were prepared for her. Her 3-year-old brother was asleep in the officer's arms and was laid on our couch while he slept off their evening escapades. And during the 4 hours that they were in our home, Sophie cried as she shared that she missed her mommy and daddy. We found out that her 5-year-old birthday had been just the day before, and we vowed ourselves as a couple that we would never be home devoid of birthday candles again when we learned she hadn't yet gotten to eat her cake. And we comforted her brother Max when he woke up and she wasn't in immediate eyesight. And we played games and we watched a TV show, and there was a quick run to Target when they opened to replace their shoes that had holes in them and their dirty, ratty jackets. And a caseworker shows up at 8:30 a.m. to pick up the 2 kids, where he would take them to a child welfare office where they would wait an average of 5 to 7 hours for a foster family to say yes. What Sophie and Max did for my husband and I was make the foster care system very personal. Last night, over 7,000 kids in the state of Oregon spent the night in foster care. We have about 50% of the foster homes we need. And the tendency in our community is to look at the Department of Human Services and to count all of its failures. We hear it and we see it in the media all the time, especially in the last couple weeks. And the truth of the matter is that these are our community's kids. And we believe that it takes all of us together, linking arms and bringing whatever we can to the table to ensure that children have the most holistic, loving, secure care that they can have. And so Every Child was actually birthed in Portland in 2012 and started with a very bold idea. If 1 in 4 Oregonians engage with the Department of Human Services, then 3 out of 4 probably have very little idea of what happens behind the walls of the agency. And if we really believe that there's something that everybody can do, what if we started with something simple like a welcome box? A memory box that is simply full of items for children, so that when they first come to a child welfare office, they have some toys and some snacks and some crayons to simply entertain them while they're waiting in the office. And what if, as a community, we included a sweet little message on the lid box that says something like what Madeline wrote, "You matter," so that in a child's moment of greatest vulnerability, they have something from the community at large. Welcome boxes became the catalyst for what is now becoming a statewide effort. We are intentional about flipping this paradigm on its head, the paradigm that says you can either do nothing or become a foster parent, and instead inviting the community to bring whatever they can to the table by providing tangible goods and services, by volunteering, or by stepping into foster care. And here's how we're doing it. We're inviting community members to make welcome boxes. We're inviting folks to make launch boxes, which are large plastic tubs for youth who are aging out of foster care, or for biological families who are getting their children back and need just a little bit of encouragement and assistance to get stabilized. Every child welfare office in the counties where we're currently working has a whole slew of community volunteers like y'all who have said, we just want to know when a caseworker has an emergency need for a child who's on their caseload. And community members like you are providing bunk beds or tennis shoes for a youth who wants to try out for JV basketball. They're signing up to deliver freezer meals to foster families when they first get a placement. And it's all because the community is mobilizing together. And then we offer different ways for people to volunteer, whether it's a one-time activity like making over a visitation room at a child welfare office, where a biological parent gets a precious 1 hour a week to visit with their child who's in foster care. Or volunteering as an office buddy, which is one of our signature opportunities where folks who've been background checked and approved can actually come and sit in a child welfare office with a child who is awaiting their foster placement in that 5 to 7 hour waiting period. Since we begun in 2013, the community in Oregon has responded in massive ways. Over 22,000 of these welcome boxes have been delivered to child welfare offices across the state. Most of the offices actually now have storehouses where they can just pull the box by the age and gender of a child. We also have done over $750,000 worth of makeovers at child welfare offices because we believe that space speaks dignity and worth and value over children and families. And it turns out that the community is pretty good at that, at creating great space, but it's never a budget line item in a government agency's budget. If you've been to the DMV lately, then you know what a child welfare office looks and feels like. And we believe that kids deserve better. And so that's one of the ways that the community has showed up in really practical ways. We are also relentless about foster family recruitment because as the Maynards shared and Sarah's story shares as well, our goal is that there's actually a waiting list of foster families, not a backlog of children that are entering care, which is where we find ourselves now. We dream of a day when every child would have a safe and strategic home, where DHS wasn't just placing kids based on where there was an empty bed or a roof over a child's head, but where the family was the best match for that child for as long as they're in the system. In the state of Oregon, and if you're in Washington, there's actually 3 different types of foster care, and most people don't know this. The first is that there's the opportunity to do respite care, which is simply babysitting for a foster family, giving them a break over a weekend. And all it requires is a background check and getting connected to a foster family. The second type of foster care is called short-term or shelter care. In Multnomah County, there are only 4 families that are on this list. And when a child like the ones, Sophie and Max, that we had come into care, they need a list of folks that they can call to care for them for a night or for a weekend while they try to find a relative, ideally, or a long-term foster family that can care for them for as long as they're in the system. And then we're relentless about recruiting for long-term foster families as well. In the state of Oregon, 58% of the time children are reunified with their families, and so I appreciate that you share that that is the goal of foster care because it is. And what we're finding is that when foster families come forward and they're caring well for children for that 18-month or longer period of time, or shorter in some instances, that when they can also get to connect with the biological family and support them as their children are reunified, it's a really, really beautiful relationship. It has redemption written all over it. And we're seeing that across the state. To date, Every Child has become the Department of Human Services' strongest foster family recruiter in history. We have 541 foster families that have come forward over the last 5 years, which is incredible. Thank you. But it's still not enough. The truth of the matter is that in Portland and in the state of Oregon, we need more and more people to say yes, whether that's for a weekend, whether it's for 2 weeks, or whether it's for as long as a child's in care. But as I shared, the question is not do nothing or become a foster parent. We honestly believe that there's something everybody can bring to the table. My husband and I had a long-term foster placement that was with us for 18 months. And when we said goodbye, I wrote this letter to her that I wanted to share with you in closing. Dear child, you came to our home with a label, foster child. This label both follows you and often precedes you wherever you go. It has some ugly stereotypes, stigmas, and statistical outcomes. You're more likely to suffer from diabetes and obesity. You're more likely to be homeless. You're less likely to attend college, and you're more likely to have a child yourself who is involved with child welfare. But this label does not define you, child. Together, we're writing a different story. This world may have expectations of you. In fact, it may even lower its expectations for you. But this world doesn't get to write your story. As you grow up, you won't remember every person who loved you or who advocated for you, but your army is massive. Pop, Nana, Grandpa, Grandma, aunts, uncles, teachers, friends, these are our people who we introduced to you, and they swept you up with intentionality and love. In our weekly rhythms, the time you spent with them made you stronger, braver, and more self-assured. But you came to my house, your foster home, with an entire team of people who were already fighting for you. A caseworker, a court-appointed special advocate, or CASA, a therapist, a doctor, a dentist, and a lawyer. We are the army who loves you and who is fighting for you. While you play at the park, we're fighting for you. While you're at school, we're working with your mom and dad to get them safe and healthy for you. And what amazes me about your army, your community, is that it extends beyond the people whose names and faces we know. When you came to my house, you had a welcome box in your hand, a collection of items from a community member that we will never meet. When you had a growth spurt, shoes and clothes were given by someone you'll never know. Each week when you visit with your mom, you sit in a visitation room that's been beautified by volunteers. There are heroes all around us, child. And so despite what any statistics may say or labels may insinuate, your community is fighting for you so that you can do great things. The irony is that while we've linked arms on your behalf, you've transformed us and made us better. You've made your community stronger. And that is quite the legacy to leave, dear child. With love, your foster mom. So quickly, on behalf of the 7,000 children in foster care in Oregon and the 400,000 across the country, I want to thank you for being children's community. You may now have some questions that we would love to answer for Sarah, for the Maynards, for myself.
First question though, Brooke, can you just tell us what the basic requirements are to be a foster family?
I can. In the state of Oregon, there is a home study process and a foundations training course that's 24 hours of training, includes a background check and medical history, invasive questions. It's great. And then when you're done with that, it depends on which county that you live in, but it takes anywhere from 3 months to 9 months for that certification to be complete. But if you're interested in doing respite care, which is just babysitting for foster families, it's a much simpler process. When you leave today, if you're interested in foster parenting, you're interested in getting just more info about volunteering, there'll be a card with our website on it, and you're more than welcome to visit, fill out your little form, and we'll get you connected. If you happen to live in Washington or Idaho, we're happy to make connections for you in those places as well.
They're asking about adopting and also foster care if you have existing biological children.
Here's the thing I believe about that myself, coming out of this, knowing the statistics you read and telling you some of the ones I did about care and about the realities of what happens to kids who don't experience unconditional love and stability. And as they shared with you, the real question you need to ask is, what are you called to do about this? Regardless of if you have a biological children yourself. Now, there's considerations I would have, because foster care can be difficult and messy, and a lot of children who are in care come from abusive home environments that need special dedication or special care. In my family, interestingly, I like that this question came up. My parents were offered initially the twins in my family before me. And they usually want to keep twins together. And my parents didn't believe they had the ability to do that. And they also believed that they really needed to focus on one. And looking back at that, that is what I needed. I really did need separation from my biological family, and I needed one-on-one attention. So it's really about the needs of the child, the needs of your family. Like if you have minor children, especially minor female children, those are things you have to consider. But the real big question is, as you said, when we pray, what are you required to do? What are you being asked to do? So that would be my answer.
I'm going to add to that too and say, I know I don't have any biological children, but I have dear, dear friends who do. And a lot of foster families that have come forward through this effort do have biological children. You do have the ability, as you're alluding to select the ages and behaviors that fit best for your family, even gender. But in addition, I would say that every single person that I have talked to would say that it has been messy, but it has been transformative for their biological children as well.
Can you raise your hand if you've had biological children and you've had more than one child? Anybody out there? Okay. How many of them were exactly alike? It's the same with adoption. It's what strikes me. I mean, that's part of I think that being pro-life is seeing individuals as individual human beings with dignity and worth, and meeting their needs to the capability that we have and that we possess, right? And so asking what is it going to be like to bring home an adoptive or a foster care child into a family that already has biological children is a kind of impossible answer to give generally, because you're talking about individual people, and it's going to depend on that person and where you're at and your willingness to be open to that process as well.
A four-person answer here. I think something else that you could take into consideration is that children emulate us. And so they're going to do as well with it as you do. You'll teach them, you'll lead them. And like our children love babies. Even our 12-year-old son love babies because we do. That's the culture in our home. And if you love that foster child, even if it's messy, even if it's difficult, especially when it's messy and difficult, then your kids will too. And if you complain about that child and have negative feelings toward that child in a public way, then your children will too. So you set the culture and the tone in your home. And it doesn't mean it won't be messy or that it won't be difficult. But parenting is messy and parenting is difficult, no matter the circumstances that you're doing it in. So if you're feeling called toward that, I wouldn't look at the hurdles. I would look at solutions. How can we do this? Because you can.
I wanted to add one more thing quickly, too, from my perspective as a foster kid and then later adopted. I have felt no difference having my parents that adopted me are my parents. I don't think they could love me more than they do. I truly don't. If I grew in my adopted mother's womb, I don't think she could love me more. So it's really here that, kids that go through foster care and are adopted, they can't experience the fullness of the relationship that with a biological mother could have. And I would say that's not true. I think that my adopted parents love me more than, I mean, there's no way I could see it differently. I know they do. So just encouragement for if you're concerned about loving a biological child and loving an adopted child the same, I don't feel any different.
You know, Jesus was adopted too, right? Joseph adopted him. So if it's good enough for our Lord.
Hey, Brooke, are you? What about if? How can you do foster care if both the adults in the home that want to foster are full-time workers?
Ah, such a great question. That's our story. So we actually started with weekends only for that reason. So from Friday night to Monday morning. And then when there was a child who was just a really good fit, then I had been the crazy lady calling daycares around the city and saying, I don't have any kids, I don't know what age they're going to be, and I don't know when I'm getting them, but do you have space, and how much is it? Seriously. So I had my short list of people to call when I needed it. The truth of the matter is that it is a financial burden if you both work and have to put a child in daycare. There is a reimbursement from the state in Oregon as well as a child care reimbursement, but it's not nearly enough to cover the cost of full-time child care, and so that is a consideration. What we have found is that there's some really incredible support networks that exist. We have a really beautiful community group ourselves that we're willing to step in and to help to provide childcare for us when the fit was right. So perhaps it's a question of ultimate surrender and recognizing that we're stepping in and that the results will get worked out as they need to.
We have a couple questions that I'm not going to refer to the panel. I just want to. There's a couple questions about specific cases that Brooke specifically mentioned, and I do know that like the foster system and these parents up here are very careful about the privacy of all these children. So I'm not going to give you guys. That's just the only reason. If you ask specifically like about Sophia and Max and other things, we're going to just pass on those questions just because they're little people with the right to share their own story. Okay, so they have a question about what happens. Somebody else has a question about what happens when you turn 18. To kids in the foster care.
Like aging out of foster care,
Yeah.
meaning? Well, in my family, my siblings were, see, the thing that was complicated in my case specifically is I was one of the youngest, so actually in my home, only the 3 youngest children were ultimately were adopted. The older ones never were. And they did age out of foster care. And I don't know if this answers the question. Maybe you'll answer the technical part of this question, okay? But I'll answer what could happen, the sad reality of what happens when kids age out, is they don't have stability or a family, and there's a gap in their life. They can't, I don't want to say they'll never recover, but the siblings in my family who weren't in a stable foster care family for a long period of time, or who were never adopted, their outcomes didn't end well. And like I shared about my sister, but when that is provided, even if it isn't with the permanence of adoption, even if it's with a foster care family, like I have a sister who had a foster care parent who, imperfect, but was there for her throughout her life. Because of that, I believe she's more of a stable individual and more of a healed person because she did have that person in her life. So I think it's important that they have that, because otherwise you'll see what you've seen in my family, which is drug addiction, illicit sex, things that you don't want to see anyone walk through. So that's kind of the, I guess, subjective answer to that.
How many of you live in the Portland metro area? Can I see a raise of hands? Okay, great. Thank you. Tell you what, getting involved with the foster system has given me such empathy for homelessness. About 60% of kids who age out of foster care in Oregon end up homeless within 5 years. And it's because of a lack of stability and support that they've experienced all through their lives. So when a child turns 18 in Oregon, they have a choice whether to stay connected to our Department of Human Services in what's called an independent living program and get training for the workforce, get assistance with housing, or to sever that relationship with the agency. And after being involved with the system, you can imagine what most 18-year-olds would choose. They are just done and want to go on their way. So there is a massive opportunity, I think, to come alongside youth who are aging out and to provide stability. And if that's something you're interested in, there's some great organizations that I can connect you with.
Okay, Jocelyn and Ryan, someone is concerned about DHS and foster families that are Christian by belief.
What?
Well, as you have revealed with your many references, you guys are believers, and someone is concerned that DHS, they're just concerned about that relationship, how DHS might feel about foster parents that are strong believers.
When you've met one social worker, you've met one social worker. They're all different and have had different experiences with a variety of people. Jocelyn and I are convicted that we have to live honestly and truthfully. And if that puts roadblocks up for somebody else in the DHS system, okay. That's part of the witness of living the faith. We have found that being authentically who we are is always better. You know, people might disagree with our faith, they might disagree with our creed, but I haven't met many people that don't like an honest, genuine person, honest, genuine couple. And I think that goes an awful long way in bridging any differences in belief.
Great answer. All right, so this question is for Sarah, and those of you who may not have looked...
I'm sorry, Liberty.
Oh, go
Can I
ahead.
speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I would actually say that about 80% of the foster families that have come forward through our effort are people of faith, as we are as well. So I would just say that the Department of Human Services in Oregon, from the top all the way down, is asking the church for help and asking overtly. And so although your statement is so very correct, just like anything, there's individuals, right, with different thinking. What we've found is that although a family might not be the right fit for every single child, which is true no matter what, that we need more families, and with the ethic of laying down your life for another and opening your door to a stranger, people of faith are uniquely called and equipped to this work.
All right, so you guys just love clapping. Okay, Sarah, for those of you who have not looked ahead in your schedule, right after this, in the next workshop, Sarah is going to be doing another talk. So Sarah, you might cover this, but someone would like to know. So some people say that children who might suffer go into the foster care system and suffer. It would have been better for them. Sorry, that's what a lot of people say, is that, Sarah, you should have been aborted. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was talking beforehand with someone about this. You know, this is my perspective, and I can only give my perspective on this. But the reason people say that is because they experience such horrible things, you know, like what I did as a child. And I do talk about this a little bit in the next workshop, but I think we need to validate what children are going through and say what is. Because otherwise, if we put a Band-Aid and say it's not really true what's happening to children, then we're not really being helpful. Now, what I do is I say, yes, what happened to me was horrible, and it took me years to recover, and it's still going to take me time to recover. But is my life worth living? Was those 9 years of my life the only portion of my life that I have? Is that my whole life? You know, if my mother would have, you know, listened to that abortionist, I wouldn't have my son here today, a whole nother life. So that answer, you know, that solution, abortion, it doesn't really solve anything, because it is like a Band-Aid. It's saying, and it's also, I mean, it's ending a person's life, and it's not solving the problem of unwanted children in the meantime. But I hope that, that's a little bit, I will talk more in my workshop about some of those things.
Okay, some of these questions, it's very specific, but obviously every case is wildly different. So Brooke, can you do the best you can with these 3 questions that are all connected? What is the process of adopting your own child through the foster care system? How likely is it? And also, basically, what's the process that biological parents might lose their parental rights? And the Maynards could probably speak to that.
Okay, I'm actually going to start with the last one first. So every year, DHS in Oregon releases a data book that gives all of the statistics. So this is last year's information, but the primary 3 reasons that parents lose their parental rights is neglect, substance dependency, and abuse. So often, those are interconnected, and very rarely do children come into care or are parental rights terminated based on just one of those factors. The federal law says that the agency has to give a parent 12 months to try to follow a plan to create some more stability in their home and to get their child back. If a parent doesn't follow through on any of the requirements that are necessary, so if we're talking about substance dependency, then there are likely some anger management courses as well as some a detox facility. If they're unwilling to do that or are not showing up for visits regularly, then actually the judicial system makes the determination to terminate those rights. It's a lengthy process. Children who are legally free or whose biological parental rights are close to being terminated are the kids that are on the website that they were referring to earlier. So if an individual is going into this with just the hope to adopt, then they're looking at children who are either close to that point where that decision can be made or whose biological parental rights have already been terminated. And in the state of Oregon, it is really lengthy and messy to go through the state to adopt directly. It is possible, but there are 3 families that are chosen for any child, and it goes to a committee, and the committee is the one that looks at all of the profiles and decides who's the best match for the child. So it can be really heartbreaking. I have some friends who've gone to the committee multiple times and been told no after each time, and you can imagine the emotions that are wrapped up in that. That said, what we know is true is that if families are willing to do foster care, then eventually one of the kids that they end up with in their home through fostering will transition into an adoptive case, but there's just no guarantees. So the options really for adoption are to go through a private agency like what the Maynards had shared, or to go directly through DHS, recognizing that it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster ride, but there's children who need you to go on the ride.
Do you guys have any final thoughts? We have about 3 or 4 minutes left. Anything to close it up?
When she says a bit of a roller coaster, but they're so darn exciting too, right? Okay, and that's the thing. There's no way to sugarcoat the process. You said you can imagine how difficult it would be, and then you do it, and you're like, wow, this is more. This is more. This is more frightening. This is more of a challenge, of a test of faith and of relationship. And it's so much better than I hoped for. I'm so glad you said that about loving your adoptive parents and being loved by them. Honestly, that was one of my fears when we first started. Am I going to be able to love this little person as much as I would my own child? When we first met our oldest son, John Paul, in the hospital, he was a baby, he was in the NICU. And it took a long time, but after about 2 seconds, I realized I didn't need to worry about that. And, you know, now that he's a middle schooler, though, it's different. But no, it is a wild ride, and part of the wildness is excitement, and you get to experience both, and you can't experience one without the other.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of off that. You know, my foster care parents, you know, my mom was really the one, my adopted mom was really the one pushing, and my dad and saying, you know, we can do this, this is be good. But he was a nervous wreck about this thing, okay? So my mom, you know, they bring me home the first night. She tells me the story later on. And, you know, he always thought he wanted a little girl, and if he were going to do something like this. And apparently, the first thing I said to him when he opened his arms to me was, "Hey, Papa," like, Papa. And he decided in that moment in time, kind of, whatever she's going to go through, whatever she's going to suffer through, I'm gonna be here for her. And I still call him Papa, by the way. But, you know, I think that commitment and that assurance and that, you know, he was nervous. He knew about the realities of my birth family. You know, he knew about some of the abuse stuff. You know, he knew about those things. But he decided to put like I said earlier, put the future where it belonged, which was to say, I'm going to commit, though. I'm going to come in and I'm going to commit to her from here on out. And he did. So I just wanted to add that.
So perhaps I'll end with this bold comment. The comment that I think most foster parents get the most in the community, you can vouch for me, tell me if I'm wrong, is I could never do it. It would be too hard. I'm glad that you're made that way. I'm not. And the truth of the matter is that none of us are made this way. We're not made to love unabandonedly and then with the potential of saying goodbye. It's not how family's been designed. And at the same time, I believe from the top of my head to the tips of my toes that we are called to step in for children and to advocate for them. And advocacy comes with action. And that doesn't mean that we're all called to be a foster parent in every season of life, in every chapter, or that we're all called to be foster parents, but it does mean that we're all called to engage in some way in this space. And I have been so honored to get a front row seat to see how in Oregon, people are stepping forward in radical generosity and radical hospitality that frankly makes no sense and yet is exactly what kids need.
All right, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much.